It's great to be here, and thank you very much indeed to Zolu and everyone who's been involved with making this event possible. The title of my talk, I think, is From Micro to Macro. But actually what it is how to change the world in 5 steps. And so this is where I've spent most of my life, is in this little green dot. And I've been trying to change things which look a bit like this. So not only is this thing much bigger, but it's a completely different shape. And so I've spent a lot of time working with people in the green dot, trying to change the big blue square. And the question is how you make that transition. Either your thing becomes a system or you change some existing system. And my experience of lots of social innovation is very few make this crossing. Some don't even want to make the crossing. Some fall into the chasm in between. And so this is just some reflections, really, on what I think it takes. And the key thing is that the things that really bring change in society are movements with missions. Now, I know movements are the sort of new black, that everyone has to have a movement. But what I think we need to understand is when movements bring real change, when they're not just a hashtag or a fashion accessory or dreamt up by a marketing department, but when do movements really bring about change? And how do they change social norms? So how people behave with one another. How do they change markets, what is in demand and what is supplied, and how do they flip public systems? And there are a few movements that do that. And they usually start with the first step, is that they start with prophets in the wilderness. They start with people who live and believe in ideas which are often well outside and antagonistic to the mainstream, but they don't mind that. So I'll just show you a picture of a prophet in the wilderness. I don't know if anyone here knows who this is. Anyone know who this is? This guy, by 2044, this guy will have changed the world. He would have changed the kind of world that Talia was talking about earlier. This guy's name is Donald Watson. And at the age of 14, 1924, he saw a pig being slaughtered on his uncle's farm. And almost overnight, he became a vegetarian. 1944, with 4 other people, he formed the Vegan Society. And veganism then, for 60 years, was an extraordinarily odd, esoteric cult of people who were punks and hippies, who followed very strange diets, and they were generally regarded as very weird. And then over the last 10 years, something extraordinary has happened, and veganism has gone completely mainstream. And it's gone completely mainstream because young people have been drawn to it, because supermarkets have seen a market, because there are bloggers and others who satisfy this craving for clean, ethical, low-cost eating. And so veganism has gone from absolutely the margins to becoming the mainstream. And my prediction would be that in 2044, we will not be vegans, but many of us will be eating clean meat. In other words, the future of the whole livestock industry, which is a crucial part of the story of climate change, is going to be changed by this movement. This is one of the most dynamic movements changing one of the biggest industries in the world, and it started with 4 people in Leicester in 1944, prophets in the wilderness. Anyone know who this woman is? So this woman will have changed every life in this room. This woman's ideas are more radical and more socially progressive than anyone who ever came out of Silicon Valley. This is Margaret Sanger. And in 1916, Margaret Sanger opened the first birth control and family planning clinic in Brooklyn in New York. She was promptly imprisoned because it was against the law. Prophets in the wilderness often have to do things which are actually illegal because they're going against the norms of prevailing society. Sanger was the most articulate exponent of free love that America had ever produced prior to the 1960s. Had she gone to Woodstock, she would have been completely at home, but she was born 70 years too early. But it was Sanger's belief that women were treated unfairly, that families were a lottery, that women carried all sorts of unfair burdens and risks around sex and marriage and so on and so forth, that led her to pursue, almost on her own, for about 50 years, the creation of the contraceptive pill. And so if it wasn't for her, the contraceptive pill would never have been created, and we wouldn't be using it today. But the journey to create it was not the story of an individual, nor was it the story of a company. It was really the story of a movement. And it was the story of a scientific and research movement to create the pill, and the women's movement to create the environment in which that innovation took place. Within 5 years of its launch, 6 million women in the United States were using the pill. Why was that? Because the women's movement had paved the way for that innovation. Just after the pill was licensed for use in America, American censors gave permission for Lady Chatterley's Lover, D.H. Lawrence's raunchy novel, to be published in America. After that came the Beatles and the 60s. And so this innovation moved into a world created by this movement. So movements that really change the world start with prophets in the wilderness. And they create places, a bit like churches, where people gather the faithful. Because movements often are not quick and fast, they're long. They take a long time to build up, and they need places where people can support one another through what is often a very long gestation period. But if they're going to really change the world, they need to do 3 other things to make the crossing from the margins to the mainstream. They need investors like this woman and engineers and scientists like this guy. His name is Gregory Pincus. He did a lot of the research on the pill in a remarkable scientific institution. She was the original venture philanthropist who funded the work through Planned Parenthood that made the pill possible. But really what changes is when you can create 3 things. The first is a moving frame. So movements actually have to move people. You cannot just create a movement with a network or an email list or a hashtag. You actually have to move people. And so what these people all do is, drawing on the kinds of lessons that Ella's very good article points out, is that they create a frame for understanding the issue which is genuinely moving. Why this is wrong, who is responsible, what you can do about it to change it, how you can find other people who share this committed view of the world. So you have to be good at creating a moving frame. And too often the frames that we create are not moving. They're technocratic, they're about designers, they're about innovation, they're about abstract concepts. They have to be about emotion. We have to learn how to deliver the truth with an emotional delivery system. The second thing that they all do is they go from opposition, being just against things, to also being about proposition. They're proposing things. They're arguing and advocating for something better. They become a movement for, not just a movement against. And they, as a result, go from marginal markets to mainstream markets. And the third thing they do is they engage the enemy. And by the engaging the enemy, I don't mean just criticizing big companies or governments or whoever it is who may be responsible for the ill, they engage the enemy to win over the enemy. And this is a crucial test of movements. The test is not how many of the faithful you gather, it's how many converts you make. And to make converts, you have to step into a middle ground between you and the systems that you want to change. So when it came to selling the idea of the contraceptive pill, it was not Margaret Sanger who did that. Because Margaret Sanger's radical account of the defeat of patriarchy, the breakup of the family, and free sex would not have won over the mainstream. Instead, it was given to this guy, an upstanding Catholic gynecologist, who sold the contraceptive pill as birth control. Birth control. The idea of control is an inherently conservative idea. Planned Parenthood birth control. So had it been sold as radical free love and the end of patriarchy, America would never have accepted it. But as it was sold as birth control for better families, actually conservative people accepted a radical innovation. And one of the things that we need to get good at is selling radical innovation in conservative language. And the other thing that they do is they become incredibly good at understanding the system that they're dealing with. Brilliant example of that is ACT UP, the coalition that got the entire pharmaceutical industry in America to change its approach to the research into HIV. And it did that through brilliant campaigning. But what it really did underneath that, quietly, was understand the mechanics of the funding and research system so they could create better drugs more quickly. So you have to understand the system and respect it and know how to embrace its language and interests. This guy, probably the most impressive social innovator I've ever met, Madhav Chavan, who created Pratham. Pratham is a movement for children's education in India. And you may say, so what's the relevance of all of this to Turkey? So thanks to Ayla Göksel, who spoke earlier, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to have what I thought was one of the most remarkable days of my professional life, because I went deep into the Istanbul suburbs to join this group of women in one of Achev's mothers' groups, where they were being schooled or led or facilitated by this teacher to learn how to become better mothers, to enable their children to do better at school. And so it was an absolutely intense, electric, committed, emotional atmosphere in that room. So just look at that picture and look at those women and just think about what is going on in that room. And who indeed is in the room. Because these women are part of a really big story. It's a story of social transformation. It's a story of people born in rural villages moving to the city. It's about women's equality and education. And if you look at them there, it may look as if they're just simply doing some kind of exercise on a piece of paper. But what these women are there for is to live a larger life. That's what this is about. It's to be a larger me. And they want a larger life for their children. And to be part of creating something better for their society. And just think about who is in the room, because the women are in the room, but also their past selves are in the room. They're the women they're leaving behind. And their mothers are in the room because of the memories of what their mothers' lives were like. And their children are in the room, and their grandchildren are in the room. This is like a quantum room, because the people you can see in the room don't represent all of actually who is in the room and all of the stories that are unfolding through it. So what this room is all about is about people searching for significance in their lives and the movements helping them to create that sense of significance. Later that evening, I spent some time with fathers who are doing the same thing. This is molecular social change. This is changing the energy and the bonds at the roots of society to bring about bigger change through stories that people embrace about themselves. So if I have one recommendation for you, it is to think that you will achieve most by being part of a movement. Movements have lots of limitations, lots of downsides. There are many, many different ways that they can go wrong. But the most renewable source of power in the world is not just solar power, it's citizen power. It's the electricity that flows between people. And movements with missions mobilize that endlessly renewable power of citizens and people. And that's why they are going to be absolutely central to a better future for all of us. Thank you very much.